Time does something unusual as we age. Researchers have noted that by the time a person reaches 60, the brain processes familiar events far more quickly than it did in youth. Not because the mind has weakened, but because it has learned too much. It predicts more. It reacts less. It recognizes patterns instantly. And when the brain stops pausing for details, time itself begins to feel thinner, as if the days slide past without fully landing. This single idea explains a quiet experience shared by millions of older adults. Life feels faster, even when the body moves slower. Now imagine a simple scene. A man in his 60s opens his door at sunrise. The air is cool, the light is soft. He has lived this morning thousands of times. Nothing is new enough to make the brain stop and pay attention. So the minutes pass quietly. The hour ends gently, but in his memory it barely registers. The day already feels shorter. Or imagine a woman looking through an old album. Her childhood summers feel long, almost endless. But the last 10 years blur together, not because they were unimportant, but because they were predictable. There is a scientific explanation for this. Over a century ago, psychologist William James wrote that time feels slower when life is filled with novelty and faster when life becomes repetitive. Modern neuroscience agrees. When something new enters your day, a new view, a new task, a new conversation, the brain creates more memory markers. But when days repeat themselves, the brain compresses them into a single block. This leads to a profound truth. Time doesn't speed up because you grow older. Time speeds up because the world looks more familiar. Familiarity is efficient, but it makes life feel fast. Novelty is slow because it forces the mind to awaken. Let's return to a cinematic moment. Picture a quiet room, the same clock, the same chair, the same routines repeated for years. The brain has mastered every detail. There is nothing to study, nothing to decode. So the day collapses into a memory that feels short. Now picture a different scene. A person walking on a new street. A different smell in the air. A conversation they haven't had before. A small challenge that demands attention. These moments expand the sense of time, not because the clock changes, but because the brain does. Here lies the hopeful secret most people never discover. If the brain speeds up time by compressing repetition, then we can slow time by gently reintroducing novelty. A new walk, a new habit, a new question, a new way of noticing things. This documentary explores that hidden mechanism and reveals 5 gentle, practical ways to slow time again after 60. Because the feeling of life rushing by is not a sign that your best years are gone. It is simply a signal from your brain, inviting you to experience life with fresh eyes once more. But what if the truth behind this change is far more powerful and far more hopeful than most people realize? To understand why time feels faster after 60, we need to look at how the brain handles experience. One of the most overlooked truths of aging is this: the mind becomes selective, not weaker, not slower, simply more focused on what matters and less interested in what it has already mastered. This selectivity is the first major shift that alters our sense of time. Neuroscientists often explain that the brain saves energy by filtering out repeated patterns. In youth, almost everything is new. The brain pays attention to colors, smells, voices, textures, and tiny details that feel important. But after 60, the brain recognizes most patterns instantly, so it ignores many of the small signals it once studied. This selective attention is useful, but it has a consequence. If the brain doesn't pay attention to details, it doesn't store many memories. And when the mind stores fewer memories, the passage of time feels compressed. Think of it like this. A child remembers a day because everything surprised them. An adult remembers only the highlights because the rest felt familiar. This is why a single week at age 9 feels long, and a full year at age 60 feels short. You can picture it visually. A person walks through a market they have visited for decades. They know the voices, they know the layout, they know the smell of the fruit. Their brain recognizes the environment instantly and records almost nothing. The day becomes lighter in memory and therefore faster in feeling. Research from the University of Toronto supports this, showing that older adults form fewer context-rich memories because their brains are more selective, not less capable. The mind chooses its focus, and that choice shapes our experience of time. A second shift happens quietly as people age. Emotional rhythms soften. Emotional reactivity, the intensity with which we respond to events, naturally decreases. This is not a decline. It is a psychological evolution. People after 60 often describe life as calmer. Small disappointments matter less. Minor successes feel steady rather than exhilarating. The emotional highs and lows become smooth. But here's the interesting part. Time feels slower during emotional peaks and faster during emotional neutrality. When something deeply surprises you, scares you, delights you, or challenges you, time expands. You can recall every detail. The moment feels long. When life is emotionally even, the minutes blend. A study from Stanford University found that older adults experience more emotional stability, which is good for well-being. But it also contributes to the feeling that days move quickly. More stability, fewer emotional spikes, fewer stretched moments, right arrow, faster sense of time. You can imagine this through a simple scene. A person sits by the window drinking tea. The light is gentle. The mood is peaceful. Nothing interrupts the moment. The calm is beautiful, but it leaves no time stamp in the mind. These first two insights point to the first two gentle ways to slow time again. New paths, new routines, new questions. Not dramatic changes, small ones. The brain wakes up again, not intense emotions, meaningful ones. A deeper conversation, a new book, a small challenge. Moments that create memory. Both practices invite the mind to observe again, instead of simply passing through the day on autopilot. And as the brain observes, time stretches. These are the first steps. But the deeper science, the part most people never hear, reveals something even more surprising. The science behind time perception becomes far more interesting when we go beyond attention and emotion. Researchers have discovered that the feeling of time speeding up after 60 is not just psychological. It is also neurological, sensory, and even metabolic. And when we understand these layers, the entire experience begins to make sense. One of the most surprising discoveries in cognitive science is that the brain constantly predicts what will happen next. This prediction process keeps us safe, helps us react quickly, and reduces mental effort. But with age, this mechanism becomes extremely efficient. By 60, a person has lived through so many patterns, conversations, routines, holidays, seasons, that the brain rarely encounters something it hasn't seen before. As a result, the brain predicts more. It analyzes less. And time, which is measured by how much the brain processes, feels faster. Think about walking into your kitchen. You already know where everything is. Your brain predicts the entire experience. Nothing slows you down to notice. This is not decline. It is mastery. But mastery shortens the feeling of time. The hippocampus is the part of the brain responsible for forming memories. Studies from the NIH show that it reacts strongly to novelty, new places, new faces, new tasks. But as experiences become more familiar, the hippocampus becomes quieter. Not dysfunctional, just quieter. It doesn't encode as many contextual details. And without detail, a moment leaves only a thin memory trace. Thin memories, right arrow thin sense of time. This is why a vacation feels long. A year at home feels short. A new hobby stretches time. A repeated routine compresses it. The brain measures time not by the clock, but by the density of memory. Another interesting finding: as people age, their internal metabolic clock slows down. Heart rate lowers, breathing stabilizes, the body moves with less urgency. But the slower the body moves, the faster the mind feels the day passing. It's the same reason sitting still makes time harder to track than walking. Motion gives the brain markers. Stillness erases them. This contrast creates a paradox. After 60, the body slows, but time feels fast. Cognitive researchers often talk about attentional narrowing in later life. This simply means that the brain focuses on what it finds meaningful and filters out what it does not. In youth, attention is wide. In age, attention becomes selective. This narrowing is actually a strength. It allows older adults to stay calmer, less reactive, and more grounded. But it also means that many moments pass unnoticed. If a moment is not labeled important, the brain lets it slide. And sliding moments create a sliding sense of time. When you combine all these elements, prediction, memory filtering, metabolic slowing, and attentional selectivity, a clear picture emerges. Time feels faster after 60 because the brain becomes more efficient at living. It uses less energy. It creates fewer memory markers. it is less surprised by life. It runs more on wisdom than on curiosity. And here is the hopeful twist. Efficiency can be gently reversed, not by forcing change, but by inviting the mind to wake up again. Simple novelty, fresh perspectives, small challenges, moments of mindful attention. The science is clear. If you increase memory density, you slow the feeling of time. The next part explores exactly how to do that, in ways that are gentle, practical, and realistic for everyday life after 60. Now that the science is clear, the next question becomes practical. What does all of this mean for your daily life after 60? If the brain speeds up time by compressing routine, then slowing time is not about making life dramatic or busy. It is about creating just enough variation and awareness for the mind to start recording again. Here are the next 3 of the 5 gentle ways to slow time and truly live again. Many people think they need big change to feel alive again. They don't. The brain responds strongly, even to small shifts. Taking a different route on your morning walk, moving a chair to a new corner, sitting in a different spot during tea, trying a 5-minute new skill, listening to a new type of music. These micro-novelties activate the hippocampus, the part of the brain that slows time by forming richer memories. Think of your brain like a camera. If you point it at the same scene every day, it stops taking photos. But change the angle even slightly, and it clicks again. Micronovelty is simple, gentle, and surprisingly powerful. Another major insight from Aging research is that awareness stretches time. When you give full attention to a moment, the mind records more of it. And the more it records, the longer it feels. This is why mindfulness practices, not spiritual, just observational, help slow down the internal clock. Examples: noticing the texture of your morning cup, paying attention to the shape of leaves outside, observing your breathing for 10 seconds, pausing before meals to register smell and warmth. These are not meditations. They are simply acts of noticing. A study from UC Berkeley found that older adults who practiced brief moments of focused awareness experienced improved memory density and reported that days felt fuller and more memorable. Purposeful engagement expands the experience of time, one moment at a time. The days that feel the slowest are those that contain emotional anchors, conversations, small victories, peaceful moments, or meaningful connections. Without emotional variation, days flatten. With emotional variation, days stretch. These anchors don't need to be dramatic. A small project that excites you. A conversation with a grandchild or friend. Planting something new in the garden. Learning one interesting fact each day. Solving a gentle challenge, like a puzzle or recipe. Emotional peaks don't need intensity. They only need sincerity. A well-known study from Stanford Center on Longevity found that older adults who cultivate small moments of interest not excitement, just interest, maintain richer memory networks and slower subjective time. Emotion gives the day shape. Shape gives the day length. When you combine micro-novelty, purposeful engagement, and emotional landmarks, something subtle happens. Your brain starts paying attention again. And when it pays attention, it records. And when it records, time stretches. These practices don't change the clock. They change the way the mind experiences the clock. In other words, time doesn't slow because life becomes easier. Time slows because you begin to notice life again. And now, with all 5 ways revealed, we can move into the gentle resolution where everything comes together in one clear, wise takeaway. As we reach the final part of this exploration, the picture becomes clear. Time does not change its speed. The clock does not move differently after 60. What changes is the way the mind experiences life, what it notices, what it filters, what it values, and what it chooses to record. When people say, life is passing too quickly, it isn't a failure of memory or agging. It's simply the brain telling us that days have become too familiar, too smooth, too predictable to leave deep marks. And that realization is not sad. It is freeing. Because if the mind compresses what it already knows, then the opposite is also true. It expands what it pays attention to. This means that the experience of time, especially after 60, is something we can shape with small, gentle choices. Let's pause for a moment and visualize what this looks like. A person steps outside for their morning walk. Their air feels slightly different today, cooler, maybe sharper. They take a new route, even if it's only a few streets away from the usual path. They notice the way the sunlight touches the leaves. They hear a sound they didn't pay attention to before, a gate clicking, a bird calling, a distant conversation. Nothing dramatic, just awareness. In that simple shift, the mind wakes up. The moment becomes real again. And that day becomes easier to remember, easier to feel, and therefore longer in experience. This is the quiet power of the 5 ways we explored. Novelty, emotional presence, meaningful attention, small peaks in the day, a gentle engagement with life. Together, they form a pattern that slows subjective time not through force, but through curiosity. Many long-living adults around the world, when interviewed, describe a similar attitude. They don't necessarily seek adventure. They seek aliveness. They lean toward the world, not away from it. They stay interested. They stay engaged. They stay observant. And their days do not blur. Their secret is not energy. It is perspective. They understand something simple. A day noticed is a day lived. A day repeated is a day forgotten. As we grow older, it becomes easier to repeat. But it also becomes more meaningful to notice. This is the quiet wisdom agging gives us, the ability to slow time not with youth, but with depth, not with speed, but with clarity. So perhaps the most important takeaway is this. Agging does not shrink life. It sharpens it. When you allow yourself to see the ordinary with fresh eyes. When you invite small novelty into your routines. When you create gentle emotional moments. Time begins to feel spacious again. Not because the clock changed, but because you did. And as the day comes to an end, imagine this closing scene. The same sun setting behind the same horizon. But the colors look slightly richer tonight. The air feels slightly more vivid. You notice the sound of your own breathing. You notice the calm around you. You notice the moment as it happens. And in that noticing, time slows. Just enough for the day to feel lived, not lost. In the end, science reminds us that agging isn't the loss of youth. It's the gain of clarity. The body may slow, but the mind, if gently awakened, becomes a wide, steady lens through which time can stretch again.